Let me paint a picture for you. It is December. You are sitting across from your manager. They pull out a document that supposedly summarizes 12 months of your professional life. Half the accomplishments are missing. 2 of the goals listed were abandoned in Q2 because the business pivoted. And there is a rating, some number between 1 and 5, that is supposed to capture the full complexity of everything you contributed this year. Sound familiar? Here is my question. If we all know this process is broken, if managers dread it and employees distrust it, why are we still doing it? The answer is inertia. Organizations keep running annual performance reviews because they have always run annual performance reviews, and that, right there, is the opposite of high-value leadership. Today, we are putting the traditional performance review on notice. We are talking about why it fails, what should replace it, and how AI is making continuous development not just aspirational, but actually executable, especially for leaders who are already stretched thin. Welcome to Unlock, Empower, Transform. I am Blackmon, HR strategist, culture transformation consultant, 3-time published author, and DBA candidate in organizational leadership. I have spent over 24 years in progressive HR leadership across automotive manufacturing, healthcare, and professional services, and I have sat through more performance reviews than I care to count on both sides of the table. This is episode 59, and if you caught Tuesday's episode on burnout being a culture problem, today's conversation is a natural extension of that. Because one of the fastest ways organizations contribute to disengagement and exhaustion is by running a performance management system that is disconnected from how work actually happens. Today, we are covering why annual reviews fail in fast-moving organizations, how real-time feedback loops powered by AI coaching assistants are changing the game, and what it looks like to redesign performance management for the modern workplace. Plus, I have an exercise for you that connects to the Shield Resilience Strategy Guide. Let us get into it. Let us start with the obvious. The annual performance review was designed for a workplace that no longer exists. It was built for environments where roles were static, projects lasted years, and the pace of change was slow enough that a once-a-year check-in made sense. That is not the world we live in anymore. Today, organizations pivot quarterly. Projects have 2-week sprints. The skills you needed in January might be outdated by July. And yet, we are still trying to capture all of that movement in a single document reviewed once a year. It is like taking a photograph of a river and calling it a video. Here are the core reasons annual reviews fail. First, recency bias. Managers disproportionately remember the last 2 to 3 months of performance. So if you had a phenomenal first half and a rough October, guess which version of you shows up in that review? The October version, every time. Your 6 months of excellence gets overshadowed by 6 weeks of difficulty. That is not evaluation. That is selective memory with consequences. Second, the feedback delay problem. When you tell someone in December what they could have improved in March, what exactly are they supposed to do with that information? That window is closed. The project is done. The team has moved on. Delayed feedback is functionally useless feedback. It creates frustration, not growth. Third, the rating trap. Reducing a human being's contribution to a number on a scale is reductive at best and destructive at worst. Ratings create competition instead of collaboration. They incentivize people to manage perceptions rather than develop skills. And they disproportionately disadvantage women and people of color because bias creeps into subjective rating systems whether we want to admit it or not. In my book, High Value Leadership, Transforming Organizations Through Purposeful Culture, Chapter 7 addresses this directly. I write about performance review innovation and the shift from traditional annual cycles to ongoing conversations with a future orientation, a development focus, and frequent touchpoints. The book outlines how growth-oriented feedback design should focus on future potential, link to development opportunities, connect to organizational vision, and celebrate learning progress. That is fundamentally different from a backward-looking rating exercise. There was a professional services company that tracked employee engagement before and after their annual review cycle. Engagement scores actually dropped by double digits in the month following reviews. Let that sink in. The process designed to develop people was actively demotivating them. When they shifted to quarterly development conversations, engagement stabilized and then improved because people felt like the process was actually connected to their real work. Now, the common pushback I hear when I talk about continuous development is this: Shay, that sounds great, but who has time for that? And honestly, that is a fair question. Managers are already overwhelmed. Adding more touch points to their calendar feels like asking someone who is drowning to also juggle. This is where AI becomes a genuine game changer. AI coaching assistants are not replacing human managers. Let me be very clear about that. What they are doing is handling the infrastructure of continuous feedback so that human leaders can focus on the conversations that actually require emotional intelligence and judgment. Here's what that looks like in practice. AI can track project milestones and prompt managers with suggested check-in points. Instead of remembering to follow up after a big presentation, the system flags it. It can analyze patterns in team output and surface potential development opportunities before anyone has to ask. It can compile ongoing feedback notes into development summaries so that when a manager sits down for a quarterly conversation, they have 12 weeks of documented context instead of whatever they can recall from memory. Think about what this solves. It eliminates recency bias because the data is continuous, not episodic. It reduces the administrative burden on managers by automating the tracking and prompting. It creates transparency because employees can see their own development data in real time instead of waiting for a year-end surprise. There was a manufacturing organization that implemented an AI-assisted feedback system for their frontline supervisors. Within 6 months, supervisor-to-employee check-ins increased from roughly once a quarter to twice a month. But here's the critical part. The supervisors did not report feeling more burdened. They reported feeling more prepared. Because the AI was doing the administrative heavy lifting, the supervisors could walk into every conversation knowing exactly what to discuss. The result was a measurable increase in employee satisfaction with their direct leadership and a noticeable decline in turnover among high performers. Now, I want to connect this to the high-value leadership framework because this is not just about technology. It is about authentic connection, the fifth pillar. Real relationships at every level of the organization. AI does not create authentic connection, but it removes the barriers that prevent leaders from having those authentic interactions. When you are not scrambling to remember what happened 3 months ago, or trying to write a review for 12 people in a week, you can actually be present in the conversation. That is where transformation happens. And for those of you navigating this as women in leadership, there is an additional benefit. Continuous documented feedback reduces the space for subjective bias to operate unchecked. When development conversations happen frequently and are supported by data, it becomes much harder for bias to masquerade as evaluation. Your contributions are tracked in real time, not reconstructed from someone's imperfect memory at year-end. So if the annual review is dead, what does the replacement actually look like? Let me walk you through the framework I teach in the High Value Leadership Intensive course, because this is where theory meets implementation. The redesign rests on 4 shifts. Shift 1, from evaluation to development. Traditional reviews ask, how did you perform? The new model asks, how are you growing? That is not a semantic difference. It changes the entire dynamic. Evaluation puts people on defense. Development puts them in motion. When the conversation is forward-looking, employees stop managing impressions and start managing their growth. Chapter 7 of my book calls this a growth-oriented feedback design, and it is foundational to building a culture of continuous improvement. Shift 2, from annual events to embedded rhythms. Development should not be a calendar event. It should be woven into how work happens. Weekly pulse check-ins, monthly development conversations, quarterly strategic alignment discussions. Each serves a different purpose, and together they create a rhythm that keeps people growing without creating meeting fatigue. The key is that each touch point is brief, focused, and connected to the person's actual work, not a generic form, not a templated questionnaire, a real conversation about real work. Shift 3, from manager-driven to co-owned. In the traditional model, the manager owns the review. They write it, deliver it, and the employee receives it. In the new model, employees co-own their development. They contribute to the agenda. They bring their own reflections. They identify the support they need. This is not about reducing accountability, it is about increasing agency. People develop faster when they are driving the process, not just passengers in it. Shift 4, from subjective ratings to multi-source insights. Replace the single manager rating with a combination of self-assessment, peer feedback, project outcome data, and AI-generated development insights. This is what Chapter 7 describes as multi-level feedback integration. When you draw from multiple sources, you get a much richer and more accurate picture of someone's contribution and growth trajectory. There was an organization in the healthcare space that made all 4 of these shifts over 18 months. They phased out numerical ratings entirely, implemented monthly development dialogues, gave employees ownership of their development plans, and introduced peer feedback as a standard part of the process. The result was a significant improvement in both employee engagement and internal promotion rates. And here's what surprised leadership the most. Managers reported the new system took less total time than the old annual review process because they were having short, focused conversations throughout the year instead of one massive documentation sprint in December. All right, exercise time. This one connects to the learning orientation component of the Shield Resilience Strategy Guide, specifically the after-action review process and the weekly reflection practice. I call this the Feedback Frequency Audit, and it takes about 5 minutes. Step 1. Think about the last 30 days. Write down every instance where you received meaningful feedback on your work. Not generic praise like "great job." Specific, actionable feedback that told you something useful about your performance or development. Step 2. Now write down every instance where you gave meaningful feedback to someone on your team or a colleague. Same criteria, specific and actionable. Step 3. Look at both lists. How many entries do you have? If the answer is fewer than 4 on either side, you are operating in a feedback desert. And feedback deserts create the same problems as the annual review. People are guessing about their performance. Growth is happening by accident, not by design. Step 4. Identify one person you will have a development-focused conversation with this week. Not a performance critique, a development conversation. Ask them, what are you working on that challenges you right now? What support would make the biggest difference? What skill are you trying to develop? That is it. That is the beginning of continuous development. The Shield Guide's Learning Orientation section walks you through building this into a consistent practice with weekly reflection questions like, what challenged me this week? What did I handle well? And how am I growing as a leader? The Feedback Frequency Audit gives you the data. The Shield Guide gives you the system to sustain it. Here is the bottom line. The annual performance review is not just outdated. It is actively working against the kind of culture most organizations say they want. If you want engaged employees, continuous development conversations. If you want equitable evaluations, multi-source feedback with real data. If you want leaders who actually lead, give them tools that make leadership sustainable, not more paperwork. If this episode sparked something for you, here is what to do next. Download the Shield Resilience Strategy Guide. The link is in the show notes. It is free, and the Learning Orientation section will give you the framework to build your own continuous development rhythm, starting this week. Grab a copy of my book, High Value Leadership: Transforming Organizations Through Purposeful Culture. Chapter 7 goes deep on everything we discussed today: performance review innovation, growth oriented feedback, transformational feedback frameworks, and building comprehensive learning systems. The link is in the show notes. And if you are ready to implement this in your organization, join the waitlist for the High Value Leadership Intensive course. We go from concept to execution with practical tools you can deploy immediately. Link is in the show notes. Drop a comment below and tell me, when was the last time you received feedback that actually helped you grow? I want to hear your stories, and I read every single comment. On Tuesday, we are back with episode 60, Remote, Hybrid, or Back to Office, the culture question nobody's asking. If your organization is still debating return to office policies without talking about culture, that episode is going to reframe the entire conversation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for challenging outdated systems with me. I am Shay Blackmon, and until next time, keep unlocking your potential, empowering those around you, and transforming the cultures that need you. Take care.